Chapter 541 A Bloody Fight. Commander Massey, could this be a trap set up by Caspian Lynch? He knew of our insufficient manpower at Tenby Passage, but insisted we fight against the enemy's 200,000-strong army. This is Mission Impossible, a David and Goliath battle, a subordinate lamented. Logan asserted, "The king is in trouble. I'll save him even if it costs me my life." But Commander Massey, why would you stay loyal to the king after he exiled you to the border? If we face off the enemy now, only death awaits us. Why don't we surrender and pledge allegiance to Filran? The subordinate suggested. You jerk! I might be in exile, but I'm still a Diatoranian at heart. I'm no traitor. One more word from you, and I'll make you suffer, Logan bellowed. The subordinate quivered fearfully and promptly shut up. At the same time, Logan couldn't help but wonder if Caspian was truly his son. After a 2-decade search, he finally got hold of some clue not long ago. Quinton Hans urgently led his men to Tenby Passage, but along the journey, they were pursued by around 10 enemy fighter jets. Stunned by the situation, his subordinate gasped in panic. "General Hans, they've caught up with us. What do we do next?" "Proceed at the quickest speed to Tenby Passage. The fighter jets won't attack us since their king is in our hands," ordered Quinton. At that moment, his priority was to keep the morale high. "Roger that!" Their sole hope lay in reaching Tenby Passage. Although the fighter jets refrained from attacking Quinton's men, their presence exerted constant pressure. Quinton and his men hastened to Tenby Passage. Upon arrival, the army at the passage had fortified their defenses. "Commander Massey, let me through. I can explain the situation to Filran, and I'll make sure you're granted a dukedom," Quinton yelled at Logan. "Quinton Hans, you treacherous villain! The Massey family has faithfully served the royalty for generations." "We will never betray our country," Logan retorted from the fort. "So what? Just look at you now, you pathetic thing. Diatoran is now surrounded by enemies at all sides, and your king is in my hands. Your country is no more. You should switch your loyalty to Filran for your future," argued Quinton. "I'm exiled to guard Tenby Passage because of a mistake I made. You have committed a great sin now by holding the king hostage. I'll promise you a dignified death if you're willing to change your ways," Logan bellowed. "Are you joking? Do you think you're my match with your measly 10,000 men? We have a 200,000-man army. Let me through, and I'll spare the lives of your men," snapped Quinton. He did not take Logan as a threat because he commanded 10 times the amount of soldiers than Logan. All he needed to do was to leave Diatoran's territory as soon as possible. He had no time to lose as the enemy's fighter jets had been tailing him. He worried that Caspian had arrived at West Eredlands. It'd be best for him to leave Diatoran at the earliest. However, if he were to be caught in a battle with Logan's men, it'd take him some time to subdue the 10,000-men army. "Quit the nonsense. I, Logan Massey, would rather die than join you in your treachery. You want to pass through Tenby Passage? Over my dead body." Logan had chosen to delay Quinton's trip. "Since you refuse to play nice, let's go. Boys, take the Tenby Passage," Quinton instructed. He wasn't about to waste more time with Logan's stubbornness. Quinton's men started to attack upon receiving the orders. At that moment, 200,000 men descended on Tenby Passage. "Listen up. It's time to protect the nation. We must defend Tenby Passage. Charge! Now!" Logan yelled and waved at his men. The army at Tenby Passage immediately started their counterattack. The area turned into a battlefield with bullets raining all over the place. Some Tenby Passage guards and Quinton's men died in the battle. The resounding explosion at Tenby Passage shook the ground. When the dawn broke, the king watched Logan fearlessly command the army from the fort. "Mr. Massey is a loyal man," the king remarked emotionally. Any ordinary man would have surrendered in the face of the enemy, but Commander Massey seems ready to sacrifice. "He joined the battle with the readiness to die," Lyndon chimed in remorsefully. "The Massey family served Diatoran well. I believe I have misunderstood them," the king added with a tinge of guilt. Meanwhile, Estria's navy had launched violent attacks on East Eredlands, as the reinforcements hadn't arrived. The situation in East Eredlands did not look favorable to Diatoran. The entire country had learned about Quinton Hans' treason and the king's abduction in the West Eredlands. Naturally, the East Eredlands champion, Cath Warren, was aware of the worsening situation as well. Since the king was in grave trouble, Cath was eager to contribute to the rescue mission. He consulted with Caspian on the matter, only to be told to stand guard in East Eredlands without worrying about the other front lines. He was relieved to learn that Caspian had arrived in West Eredlands to save the king. All he needed to do was to command the battle in the east. At the same time, the champion of Central Plains, Joseph Welch, heard the news about the coup in West Eredlands. Feeling shocked and frustrated, he wanted to immediately join the rescue mission. However, Caspian ordered him to guard Dord City just in case. Joseph dared not go against Caspian's orders. After all, Caspian led the 5 war gods and was appointed the successor by the king. Of course, he had to obey Caspian's orders. In South Eredlands, the intelligence units of Astronia and Vedesia had received news of Caspian heading toward West Eredlands. Robert Vallis and Victor O'Brien were ready to retreat from South Eredlands, but with the new update, they decided to break through Diatoran's borders. The North Eredlands champion, Benjamin Hart, was worried upon learning about Astronia and Vedesia's impending attack. Without Caspian around, he realized he had to command the army alone. Back at Tenby Passage, Logan launched a counterattack against Quinton's men by taking advantage of the geography. However, even if Tenby Passage was a geographically challenging place to tackle, Logan couldn't handle the enemy's forces with just 20,000 men. Half of his men at Tenby Passage had been killed. Even though he was struck by a stray bullet, he continued commanding. Quinton had given Filren a heads up when he made his way to Tenby Passage. Therefore, Filren's army was on their way to provide reinforcements. The Florinian authorities were elated upon learning that Quinton had abducted the Diatoranian king, and they were ready to back him up. Chapter 542, arriving at Tenby Passage. As long as Quinton successfully brought the Diatoranian king to Filren, Filren would easily subjugate the 5 war gods. It would be a huge win for Filren. Amid this critical time, Quinton's forces initiated an assault on the city wall. The 2 opposing armies engaged in close combat, and Logan, leading his troops, fought fiercely against the rebels. The king was greatly moved at the sight of a bloodied Logan who still gave his best to fight. Logan Massey is a loyal commander. After this war, I will duly reward him. Observing the deteriorating situation, the fighter jets soaring above promptly relayed the alarming developments to Caspian. Though Caspian was 6 miles away from Tenby Passage, the passage was on the verge of falling into Quinton's hands. He reluctantly commanded the fighter jets to target Quinton's forces while ensuring the safety of the king. With that, the pilots started bombing their enemies. Quinton's army, which had proceeded smoothly a minute ago, was bombed into oblivion by the city wall. Since the king remained in Quinton's hands, the fighter jets had to fire on the men by the city wall. It wasn't the most effective strategy, but it at least provided much-needed relief in the crisis. Witnessing the fighter jets retaliating, Logan and his troops gained renewed vigor, charging at the enemy with full force. Aware that the jets refrained from targeting him to avoid harming the king, Quinton decided to stay close to the latter for safety. He ordered his forces to launch missiles at the fighter jets, successfully taking down a considerable number. Meanwhile, Logan and his men had successfully taken out the enemies who had breached the city wall. Quinton, aware that Caspian was nearing, understood the increasing danger. His fate would be sealed if he failed to pass through the Tenby Passage. To succeed, he'd have to seize Tenby Passage before Caspian arrived. Left with no choice, he devised a plan and commanded, "Bring the king to the front. Continue the assault on the city walls." His men understood his motive. With the king as a shield, Logan's forces would attack. "You cowards, seize the Tenby Passage through your own strength. Using the king as a shield is an act of cowardice." Lyndon barked at the sight of the king being brought to the front line, but his protests fell on deaf ears. Following closely behind the king, Quinton knew that the close distance would ensure his personal safety. The rest of his men followed suit behind the king. "Halt! Do not harm the king!" Logan shouted when he saw the king being positioned at the forefront. The army guarding the passage dared not use heavy artillery against their enemy, and the fighter jets suspended their attacks. The sudden turn of events caught them by surprise. "Do not cease the attack because of me. Under no circumstances should you let the rebels pass," the king exclaimed, seeing his forces come to a standstill. Despite his commands, Logan's forces hesitated, fearing harm to the king. Even the pilots in the fighter jets overheard the king's impassioned plea, but none resumed the attacks, afraid of being labeled criminals for accidentally causing the king's death. "Logan Massey, this is an order. End me!" The king thundered at Logan, anxious that Quinton would escape unscathed if Logan dragged his feet. "Your Majesty, I cannot comply. "Forgive me for not following your order," Logan responded. "You must listen to me. Otherwise, the rebels will take me through Tenby Passage, turning me into a captive of Filren. I'd rather die than become a burden to Diatoran," the king pleaded. "Your Majesty, you'll be just fine. Caspian Lynch, the Diatoranian God of War, will be here to rescue you shortly," Logan insisted. "There's no time to waste." Quinton would have left Tenby Passage by the time Lord Caspian arrived. "This is an order, shoot at me," the king yelled. "I cannot possibly do that, Your Majesty. Please stop asking me," Logan said, feeling troubled. How could he possibly shoot at the king? "Do you want to make me a captive of Filren? I will lead a life without dignity. My death will be worth it if it leads our army to fight without fear," the king declared. He was never one to fear death. All he worried about was becoming a burden to the Diatoranian army. "Your Majesty, what if Lord Caspian is en route? He will surely rescue you," Logan argued. While he spoke, Quinton's forces had brought the king to the city wall. "Act now. Are you defying my orders? You will be held accountable if the rebels step out of Tenby Passage," the king urged Logan. "No, Your Majesty. I will never shoot at you," Logan affirmed. Amid Logan's hesitation, the rebels had surrounded the city wall. Quinton waved and yelled, "Charge!" The rebels charged upon the orders, leaving Logan with no choice but to fight against the rebels while the fighter jets watched on to avoid hurting the king. The rebels surged toward the remaining 10,000 defenders at Tenby Passage, a number insufficient to repel the impending onslaught. Despite Logan's relentless involvement in the battle, the tide turned against him. Injured from the fight, he was visibly exhausted. Just as the rebels were about to seize the passage, the ground resonated with the thunderous sounds of several hundred armored vehicles advancing through the dust. The shocking sound stunned everyone present, attracting their attention. Several hundred armored vehicles, along with missile carriers and other advanced equipment, were approaching Tenby Passage. The king, Lyndon, Logan, and the Diatoranian army felt a surge of joy at the sight of the leader of the armored vehicles. He was none other than the Diatoranian God of War, Caspian Lynch. On the other hand, Quinton and his men became nervous. Their worst nightmare had come true. Quinton's initial plan was to seize Tenby Passage before Caspian's arrival, after which he would be protected by the Filrenian army. Unfortunately, Caspian's unexpected arrival dealt a severe blow to him. Despair enveloped him as his plans crumbled. Before he could seize Tenby Passage, Caspian had rushed to the scene with reinforcements. Chapter 543: The Battle of Life and Death. Caspian led an army of men in steel armor, along with 2 battalions under Dax. Although he was equipped with fewer than 100,000 men, his intimidating presence struck fear in Quinton's forces. Caspian Lynch, or the Diatoranian God of War, was a famous name. A legend of Diatoran, he was simultaneously an enemy's worst nightmare. Now turned rebels, Quinton and his men found themselves facing Caspian, their former ally, whose reputation alone instilled dread. Caspian seemed to be holding a dagger in his hand. The glint on the blade was terrifying, as though it had sliced through one's neck in the next second. The enemy had no idea what he was holding, but they could sense that it was a sharp and destructive weapon. "Your Majesty, my apologies for arriving late," Caspian announced loudly upon seeing the king. His booming voice sent shivers through everyone present. "Lord Caspian, you're finally here. Rid us of the traitor Quinton Hans immediately." The king, deeply moved by Caspian's presence, felt a wave of reassurance. "Of course," Caspian replied as he closed in with his army. However, when he was within a mile, he signaled his forces to halt. He had to be cautious since the king was still in the hands of the rebels. Meanwhile, armored and missile vehicles positioned themselves at the forefront, escalating the tension. Caspian's men were prepared to fight to the death against Quinton. Noticing the huge toll on the army guarding Tenby Passage, Caspian marveled at the resilience of Logan's 20,000 men, holding their ground until his arrival. Before this, someone had approached Caspian to ascertain his family background. Caspian himself had also discreetly looked into the Massey family. Despite not knowing if Logan was his father, he carried certain expectations. The mystery of his lineage had troubled him for 2 decades. After all, Logan was thrilled to see Caspian. With one look, he could tell that Caspian was his long-lost son. The two bore a striking resemblance to each other. However, Logan soon looked away out of remorse. Due to difficult circumstances, he had dumped his few-month-old son by the steps of another family's home. The memory plagued Logan, who felt regretful of his actions. At that moment, Caspian confronted Quinton. Quinton Hans, has our king not treated you well? What did you gain from pledging your allegiance to Filrin? Caspian Lynch, you might be the Diatoranian God of War, but I do not fear you. Diatoran is faced with multiple threats, and its demise is almost guaranteed. Self-preservation is a priority. Betraying my country secures my future, argued Quinton with confidence, especially because he commanded more men than Caspian at the moment. He had no option but to fight Caspian to the bitter end. Quinton Hans, Diatoran is rich with resources and talents. It's only a matter of time before we fend off the enemies. Your decision to betray your country for Filrin led to infighting among the Diatoran soldiers, a sin punishable by death. Surrender now, and I'll at least grant you a dignified death, Caspian remarked icily. That's ridiculous. I have 200,000 men on my side. What makes you think you're my match with only 80,000 men? You're delusional for telling me to surrender. Quinton scoffed and cackled. I have seen my fair share of wars. I could even defeat you alone. Holding the king captive is a deadly sin. Surrender, or don't blame me for being heartless, Caspian retorted. The king is in my hands. Do you have the guts to lay a finger on me? Quinton felt invincible with the king under his captive. Caspian momentarily hesitated, not wanting to accidentally harm the king. Yet, he couldn't allow Quinton and his men to escape into Filrin's territory through the passage. This was Caspian's first time encountering such a dilemma. There was a coup in Dord City a few years back, where he'd commanded the army in steel armor to save the king. Back then, the king was merely held captive without any threat to his life. Lord Caspian, we cannot fire at the enemy as we wish, but we can change their minds, Massey whispered to Caspian. Surprised by the brilliant suggestion, he remarked with a chuckle, Massey, you can be quite smart when the time calls for it, even when you seem senseless in daily life. Lord Caspian, you flatter me. I'm sure you would have thought of the same had it not been for the fatigue, Massey replied humbly with a smile. Caspian nodded and was ready to put the idea to the test. At first, he panicked upon seeing the king's life in danger, but he had since calmed down. By the way, Lord Caspian, it's time to utilize your Diatanium dagger. To defeat enemy, you'll have to capture their leader first and foremost. Kill Quinton Hans, and his men will be of no threat. Massey analyzed. Great, that's a wonderful idea. I'll start with that bastard Quinton, Caspian agreed. Quinton interrupted Caspian by yelling, Caspian Lynch, do not waste your time fighting me. Surrender now and pledge your allegiance to Filrin. Given your current reputation, you will be highly appreciated for your talents at Filrin. Fuck off! I'm the Diatoranian God of War, one of the 5 war gods. I refuse to be complicit with you, bellowed Caspian. Look, you've traveled thousands of miles to fight us. You'll tarnish your undefeated records if you lose the battle to me. I'd be mindful if I were you, taunted Quinton. Ignoring Quinton, Caspian yelled at Quinton's forces, Guys, you are hot-blooded sons of Diatoran. I believe you joined the army to serve your nation, but you had no choice but to follow Quinton's steps to commit treason. I understand your dilemma, and I promise not to hold you accountable if you surrender now. Everyone present was astonished by Caspian's strategy. As one of the 5 war gods, he chose to play on the enemy's psychology, which would likely seal his victory. Caspian pressed on. You dreamed of protecting the nation when donning your uniform. Now's your chance. Have you ever thought of your families when you made the choice to commit treason with Quinton? The enemy grappled with feelings of guilt. Most of Quinton's men were reluctant to turn to Filrin. However, they had no choice but to listen to their commander or risk dying. Quinton was alarmed by the faltering morale of his men. Chapter 544, Decapitating the Foe's Commander. Caspian sensed a shift in the morale of the men around him and seized the moment to assert his influence. As soldiers, your priority is to obey orders, and while you serve under Quinton, you must follow his command. But with the king and myself, Caspian, standing before you, you have a choice to abandon the shadows for the light. As the Diatoranian God of War, I declare Quinton stripped of his rank. From this moment, he's no longer a high-ranking officer but a traitor, guilty of the most heinous crimes. In a complete panic, Quinton, who had once thought his 200,000-strong army invincible against Caspian, realized he had underestimated his opponent's strategy. Do not let Caspian bewitch you, Quinton roared in fury. I am your commander, and your loyalty lies with me. Defy me, and you die. Intimidated by Quinton's rage, his men fell silent. No one dared to oppose him. Despite the unrest, Quinton's loyalists hesitated to act. Quinton noticed the unease and continued, "Our nation teeters on the brink of destruction, surrounded by enemies. You'll face death without my leadership and our alliance with the Filrin." Caspian countered, "Your duty is to defend our homeland, even if it means death in battle. To turn a traitor is to bear an eternal mark of shame. It's not too late to redeem yourselves." Seizing the opportunity, Balthazar added, "Brave warriors of Diatoran, I, your king, assure you that I will absolve you of your past actions once you renounce your betrayal." These words stirred the rebels once more, causing Quinton to descend further into desperation. Silence. "Do you truly believe the king will forgive your treason? You have no choice but to stay with me or face death by my hand before the king and Caspian even have a chance to spare you." The rebels wavered, torn between their actions under Quinton and the promises of Caspian and Balthazar. The fear of betrayal and the prospect of death loomed large. "Why hesitate?" Caspian's voice boomed. "Balthazar himself has offered forgiveness. As the Diatoranian God of War, I vow to spare your lives if you turn back." Despite his confidence in defeating Quinton, Caspian knew the stark difference in their forces' sizes meant a battle would lead to many unnecessary deaths, not to mention the risk to Balthazar's safety. It was a strategic move to win their hearts and minds. Dilemma reigned among the rebels, unsure of whose command to follow. "The king's word is absolute. Do you not trust me?" Balthazar challenged. "With hundreds of thousands of soldiers here, what is there to fear? The time has come to choose. Stand with me and the Diatoranian God of War, or follow a traitor to your doom." Many swayed as Balthazar spoke. Their loyalty shifted in whispered discussions. "Quinton is merely a general, but I am the king of Diatoran, and the Diatoranian God of War is among the foremost of our nation's mighty warriors. Is the choice not clear?" Balthazar's words resonated deeply, causing a significant stir among the ranks. Soldiers began whispering and discussing among themselves. How could they not recognize the stature and authority of their king and the Diatoranian God of War? Their words carried far more weight than Quinton's threats. However, they had served under Quinton, and figures like the king and the Diatoranian God of War were almost beyond their reach. Traditionally, the direct command of a superior general was something that could not be easily disobeyed. With Quinton's forces now in disarray, Caspian commanded, turning to Massey, "It's time for us to act. Massey, lead a team of elite warriors to rescue the king while I take Quinton's head." At once, Massey responded without a moment's hesitation. Then, to her elite guards, she said, "Form up! We strike to save our king! As one!" The guards replied, their voices echoing with resolve. Seeing his control slipping away, Quinton bellowed, "Attack! Kill Caspian and his followers!" Quinton knew he could delay no longer. Once battle ensued, neither Balthazar nor Caspian could sway the hearts of his army. To his dismay, his orders fell on deaf ears. Caspian seized the opportunity, gripping the diatanium dagger tightly and charging directly toward Quinton. Upon seeing Caspian rush out alone, Quinton and his confidants were terrified. The crowd drew their firearms and opened fire on Caspian. The armored battalion was also taken aback seeing Caspian charge out alone. The Diatoranian God of War had actually charged out by himself. Such a situation was perilously dangerous. Quinton and his confidants unleashed a barrage of gunfire toward Caspian. Caspian used his diatanium dagger to block most of the bullets. "Charge and save the king!" Seeing Caspian make his move, Massey also led the armored battalion in a charge. The armored battalion then followed Caspian out. Quinton and his confidants found it unbelievable that Caspian could block bullets with his dagger. The dagger in Caspian's hand seemed to become a shield, rendering the bullets harmless against him. Caspian was unstoppable in his advance. Since Balthazar was in the hands of the rebels, Massey and the vanguard dared not act rashly. They could only charge forward first. With Caspian leading, Massey and the others were unharmed. The rest of the troops remained in place, not daring to fire indiscriminately at this moment. When Caspian was only 65 feet away from Quinton, his diatanium dagger suddenly flashed with a cold light. Then, Caspian burst forth in the air in a shadowy figure. Quinton and his confidants were stunned by this scene. In a flash, Caspian had already reached Quinton's front. Quinton's confidants had no time to react, and Caspian's diatanium dagger had pierced Quinton's heart. "Ugh!" Quinton's expression stiffened as he coughed up a mouthful of blood. Everyone was astounded as they saw the scene unfold. No one expected Caspian's movements to be so eerily swift. Directly assassinating Quinton, Caspian charged into the enemy ranks alone and killed Quinton. He made it seem as easy as snapping a finger. At this moment, Quinton's confidants come to their senses and begin firing at Caspian. They were too shocked to act before, and firing now was already too late. A burst of rapid gunfire sounded again. Chapter 545 Rescuing the King. Screams akin to a pig being slaughtered echoed through the air. Those who had attempted to shoot Caspian fell to the ground, riddled with bullets. Massey seized the moment and led the armored battalion in a swift takedown of these assailants. Massey and the armored battalion were rigorously trained sharpshooters. They had closely watched Quinton's men. They knew a moment's delay could jeopardize Caspian. Despite the proximity to the rebels, Massey and her team were confident in their marksmanship, ensuring Caspian remained unharmed. Their primary goal was to save Balthazar, but they had to make sure Caspian remained unscathed. Caspian withdrew his bloody diatonium dagger. Quinton's blood gushed wildly. The dagger was already stained with blood. It now bore a sinister crimson hue. Quinton's body fell straight to the ground. The sudden turn of events left everyone in shock. No one had anticipated Caspian would storm the enemy lines alone and claim their lives so directly. With Quinton slain, the rebels holding Balthazar were thrown into disarray. Massey had already led the vanguard out. They employed their most lethal tactics to wipe out the rebels. Finally, Balthazar was saved. Your Majesty, I apologize for the delay in your rescue. Please, punish me as you see fit. Caspian, Massey, and the armored battalion all knelt in submission. Rise, all of you. You have endured much. Rest assured, your efforts will be rewarded, Balthazar announced. Thank you, Your Majesty, they responded in unison. Standing up, Massey instructed the armored battalion to free Linden. Seeing their leader Quinton dead, his men realized resistance was futile and knelt in surrender. Please, Your Majesty, punish us. Nearly 200,000 rebels cried out. Balthazar and Caspian did not immediately address the rebels. Instead, they let them kneel longer. Linden was now safe. Balthazar approached Quinton's bloodied corpse. Decapitate Quinton and display his head on the walls of Tenby Passage. It was his actions that led our soldiers to fratricide, Balthazar commanded. Understood. Linden nodded. Without hesitation, he severed Quinton's head. He then handed Quinton's head to the armored battalion. Seeing that Quinton was dead, Logan opened the city gates. Logan and the garrison troops knelt before the Balthazar. The Tenby Passage garrison is at your service, Your Majesty. Stand, all of you. The garrison of Tenby Passage has done well, Balthazar praised. Thank you, Your Majesty. Logan and the troops behind him chorused. Your Majesty, how shall we deal with Quinton's allies? Caspian inquired. Show them no mercy, Balthazar declared with a sweep. Hearing Balthazar's decree, Quinton's confidants trembled with fear. Your Majesty, please spare us. We had no choice, Your Majesty. We never wished to betray you. Quinton would have killed us for disobedience. Please, give us a chance to serve faithfully henceforth. Quinton's allies pleaded desperately. You traitors. You followed Quinton in betrayal and caused countless innocent soldiers to shed their blood in vain, and the entire garrison was wiped out because of you. If I spare you, where would my authority stand? Execute them here and now, Balthazar said coldly. Balthazar had no intention of sparing Quinton's closest allies. These leaders would not have betrayed their country if they were loyal. Such individuals were useless, embodying the principle of trusting those you employ and not employing those you distrust. Upon Balthazar's command, the vanguard escorted Quinton's allies away, making them kneel before the vast army of 200,000. Spare us, Your Majesty. Please have mercy on us, Your Majesty. We had no choice, Your Majesty. They begged for mercy even in the face of death. The cold sound of gunfire put an end to their pleas, leaving them lifeless on the ground. The sight filled the hearts of the 200,000 rebels with unease. This was precisely the outcome Balthazar wished for. It was to awaken the conscience of the rebels. With Quinton and his allies dead, the leaderless rebels could no longer resist. Caspian easily resolved the crisis. Your Majesty, what shall we do with Quinton's men? Caspian asked again. Spare them, Balthazar responded. Your Majesty, these men have killed many of our troops alongside Quinton and even dared to hold you hostage. They cannot be so easily forgiven, Logan urgently argued. I've already promised them mercy. I cannot go back on my word, Balthazar stated. Your Majesty, what if they rebel again? Your guards died at their hands. Did those guards die in vain? Lyndon also argued. They were under duress, with no choice but to follow Quinton's orders, Balthazar explained. The rebels felt both moved and ashamed hearing Balthazar speak on their behalf. Your Majesty, you did promise these men, but they haven't chosen to stand with you. They have shown no intention of abandoning their malicious ways. Such individuals cannot be spared. We must trust those we use and not use those we distrust, Logan passionately advised. Although they did not take a stand, they also did not follow Quinton's orders to shoot at the Diatoranian God of War. Had they fired upon the Diatoranian God of War, the situation could have been dangerous. Their actions have already made their choice clear. To execute these 200,000 would be utterly inhumane. Quinton's men were merely following orders despite their actions. Pushing them too far could lead to a bloody conflict with over 100,000 of them. The rebels were already feeling ashamed by Balthazar's words. One of them said, Your Majesty, the crimes we have committed are unforgivable. It would be better if you killed us. Yes, we have betrayed Diatoran and are deeply ashamed. We deserve to die. Please, Your Majesty, punish us. Your Majesty, look at them. They are aware of the gravity of their crimes. Execute them to honor the fallen soldiers, Logan added. The garrison of Tenby Passage had suffered heavily due to these traitors. Logan wished for nothing more than to avenge them. Commander Massey is right. They can't be forgiven. Our guards died at their hands, Lyndon stated firmly. He clenched his teeth. His entire guard had perished because of Quinton's men. Lyndon yearned for vengeance against the rebels. Chapter 546 Redemption. Your Majesty, nearly 50,000 of my men fell at the hands of these traitors. If we don't eradicate them, wouldn't their sacrifice be for nothing? Ferb stood up and expressed his concerns. His army was once strong with 100,000 men. Quinton's followers had decimated them. Balthazar turned to Caspian for advice after being caught in a difficult position. Diatoranian God of War, what do you suggest we do in this situation? He inquired. Caspian was momentarily at a loss for words, pondering the dilemma. The logical course of action would be to execute all traitors. But the thought of slaughtering over 100,000 soldiers seemed excessively cruel. If these men were pushed to desperation and decided to rebel, the situation could spiral out of control. After a moment of thought, Caspian proposed a more reasonable solution. Your Majesty, Diatoran is besieged on all fronts, and we're in dire need of manpower. These men, although misled, did not wish for treason. We could give them a chance to redeem themselves by letting them fight on the front lines, he suggested. Balthazar nodded, seeing the wisdom in Caspian's words. The Diatoranian God of War makes a valid point. Let's give them an opportunity to redeem themselves through valor, he agreed. Suddenly, a general from Tenby Passage rushed in with urgent news. Your Majesty, a large force from Filren has been spotted approaching us, he exclaimed. They must be reinforcements for Quinton, Balthazar surmised. He was aware of Quinton's plea for aid to Filren. Now's the perfect time for Quinton's men to prove their loyalty by repelling the enemy. Caspian seized the moment to suggest. Indeed. Balthazar smiled. However, Logan immediately voiced his opposition. Absolutely not, Your Majesty, he protested. Why not, Commander Massey? Balthazar asked, puzzled by the objection. How can we be sure the traitors won't turn against us? We'd be in grave danger if they joined forces with Filren, Logan argued. Indeed, Your Majesty. Sending them to fight Filren's troops is risky. With 200,000 traitors and Filren's reinforcements, we are heavily outnumbered, Ferb added as he urged caution. Balthazar pondered the situation, recognizing the validity of everyone's concerns. The consequences could be dire in such extreme scenarios. We're willing to redeem ourselves, Your Majesty. The traitors spoke up, eager for redemption. Yes, Your Majesty. We'll surely repel the enemy forces, they continued, their voices filled with determination. Please grant us this chance to fight bravely, Your Majesty. Otherwise, we can't face anyone with honor, they pleaded. Balthazar was moved by their pleas, and turned to Caspian again for guidance. What do you suggest? Diatoranian God of War, he asked, troubled by the decision. Your Majesty, they are still Diatoranians. Giving them a chance might be the right course of action, Caspian advised. Diatoranian God of War. A single misstep could lead to eternal regret. Have you considered the danger if the traitors turn against us? Logan argued, frustrated. Despite the familial bond he sensed with Caspian, Logan knew he had to respect the Diatoranian God of War's authority. Caspian understood the risks and defended his stance. "Logan, aren't you being too cautious? We must also consider the circumstances that led to their betrayal. With Quinton gone and Filern's forces threatening, this presents an opportunity for his men to prove their loyalty. If they can fend off the enemy, their allegiance will be beyond doubt," he reasoned. He could see the resemblance between himself and Logan, but now was not the time for a family reunion. "Enough. Let's not argue further. Follow my command. Allow Quinton's troops to fight and offer them a chance to redeem themselves." Balthazar raised his hand, silencing their dispute. Balthazar could see the resemblance between Logan and Caspian, too. The prior intelligence seemed accurate. The Massey family and Caspian shared an extraordinary connection. But with the urgency of the situation, these considerations had to wait. "Thank you, Your Majesty," shouted the subordinates of Quinton in unison. "Your Majesty, please reconsider. The rebels are an unknown factor. Everyone here will be in danger if they turn against us," Logan continued to persuade. "There's no need for more discussion. I trust the Diatoranian God of War and believe in them. They are, after all, the brave sons of Diatoran," Balthazar declared. Seeing this, Logan knew he couldn't dissuade Balthazar and proposed, "Your Majesty, if you've made up your mind, I have a suggestion." "Speak," Balthazar said indifferently. "To ensure foolproof safety, they shouldn't be allowed to use heavy weapons or tanks. This way, even if the rebels harbor ill intentions, we can counter them with our heavy arsenal." Logan shared his thoughts. "Logan, asking them to face the enemy without heavy weapons is like sending them to their deaths," Balthazar responded with a tight frown. It was a terrible idea, one he would never accept it. "Your Majesty, such evil is necessary. If they have access to tanks and armored vehicles, and they turn their guns on us, we'll be powerless," Logan urged desperately. "Your Majesty, I have an idea that can easily repel the enemy." Caspian stepped forward with a nod. "Diatoranian God of War, what's your ingenious plan?" Balthazar inquired. "The enemy forces from Filern aim to join forces with Quinton's troops. We can exploit this by having Quinton's men pretend to break through our defenses and join the Filern's forces, only to ambush them unexpectedly," Caspian suggested. "Oh, how should we execute this plan? Please, God of War, elaborate," Balthazar asked further. Caspian's idea was indeed brilliant. Have Quinton's troops meet with the enemy without heavy weapons. Once they've merged, we strike the Filern's forces by surprise, Caspian explained. "God of War, your strategy is brilliant. But with Quinton gone, who will lead? And what if the Filern suspects something?" Balthazar inquired. "I hadn't considered that," Caspian admitted as he shook his head. "The absence of Quinton would surely raise suspicions among the Filern's forces. With the enemy forces closing in and no time to ponder, let me lead Quinton's troops in a feigned surrender. Seeing me captured, Filern will have no cause for suspicion." Balthazar decided. "Your Majesty, you are a distinguished figure, like a god among men. Now is not the time for such risks," Logan exclaimed anxiously. "No more words. I've made up my mind," Balthazar stated resolutely. Chapter 547, Turning the Tables. "Your Majesty, this is far too risky. If the traitors play us for fools and hand you over to Filern, the consequences could be unimaginable," Logan argued vehemently. "Worrying too much about potential dangers will only waste our time. If you can't devise a plan, at least don't stand in my way," Balthazar responded, feeling irritated. He had little patience for indecision, especially in matters of battle where hesitation could lead to defeat. "Your Majesty, I have a plan that could repel the enemy forces," Logan proposed confidently. "What is it, Commander? Speak up," Balthazar encouraged. "We could have the traitors take me to the Filern's forces, pretending to defect. As a commander of Tenby Passage, the sight of me captured would surely convince them of the passage's fall. This way, it'll raise no suspicion," Logan explained his daring strategy. "Aren't you afraid these traitors might turn against you, putting yourself in grave danger in return?" Balthazar asked, surprised by Logan's boldness. "If your Majesty is not afraid, why should I, your subordinate, hesitate to sacrifice myself?" "You are right. Dwelling on what might go wrong only delays our victory," Logan stated with unwavering resolve. "But you are wounded. It's not wise to risk yourself further," Balthazar observed, noting Logan's blood-soaked armor. He was unwilling to let him take more risks. "I am fine, Your Majesty," Now is the time for me to serve our country. Please grant me this honor, Logan implored. Very well, Commander Massey. Your willingness to infiltrate enemy ranks moves me. You shall be duly rewarded once we repel the enemy, Balthazar promised. Your Majesty, it is my duty to serve our nation. Defending Tenby Passage is my responsibility, Logan humbly replied. Commander, your bravery in the face of the enemy and your efforts in the battle against Quinton have already earned you great merit, as you prepare to venture concern. Rest assured, Your Majesty, I shall return victorious, Logan assured with a confident smile. At that moment, Lyndon stepped forward. Your Majesty, while Commander Massey's plan is bold, that does not guarantee that Filren will be completely convinced. What do you suggest, Lyndon? Balthazar inquired. Allow me to accompany him. Together, we stand a better chance of convincing them, Lyndon offered. Why do you propose this? Balthazar questioned. He was curious about Lyndon's reasoning. Filren knows that both of us were captured by Quinton. If I don't show myself, they might grow suspicious, Lyndon explained. So, you wish to join Commander Massey on this mission? Balthazar clarified. Exactly. Only by doing so can we fully convince Filren's forces, catching them entirely off guard, Lyndon elaborated. All right, Lyndon, take care. Once the battle is over, I will assist you in rebuilding the army. Balthazar consented with a nod. Don't worry, Your Majesty. We've got this under control, Lyndon responded confidently. Balthazar then addressed Quinton's vast army, saying, All of you claim to be the brave sons of Diatoran who are seeking redemption. Well, your chance has arrived. Escort Commanders Massey and Lyndon on a mission of feigned betrayal. When the time's right, we'll catch the enemy off guard and strike when they least expect it. Yes, Your Majesty. The vast army responded in unison. This operation must be under the command of Commanders Massey and Lyndon, Balthazar instructed. Yes. The army roared with their spirits lifted. Logan and Lyndon, pretending to be captives, followed Quinton's men toward Tenby Passage. Caspian respected Logan's willingness to risk his life despite his injuries. Although he was unfamiliar with him, he was a man deserving of respect regardless of whether Logan was his father. However, the mission was dangerous. Logan's life was on the line. To expedite our victory, we might consider using heavy artillery against the rear of Filren's forces, Caspian suggested. Let's proceed with your plan, Balthazar agreed. Yes, Your Majesty, Caspian responded, wasting no time. He ordered the armored battalion to prepare the heavy artillery for an impending assault. Filren's 100,000-strong force was now mere hundreds of feet away from Tenby Passage. The enemy remained unaware of the impending trick as they saw Quinton's men emerge from the passage. They did not even realize Logan and Lyndon were there. Hold on! Where's Quinton? And where's the Diatoranian king? An enemy commander shouted out, sensing something was amiss. A general then stepped forward and claimed, Commander Quinton and the king are at the rear. The Filrenian commanders bought the story and halted their advance. Commander, something seems off, another Filren general said, as they closed in within 90 to 130 feet away. What's the matter? The enemy commander inquired. Quinton's surrendering to us, so logically, he should be leading the way. But there's no sign of Quinton or the Diatoranian king. Could this be a trap? The Filrenian general speculated. Realization dawned on the enemy commander, who then ordered, Halt! Bring out Quinton and the Diatoranian king now. Logan knew it was time to act as he realized they were only a few dozen feet from the Filrenian forces, and that the enemy had detected the ruse. Charge with me! Logan roared. Following Logan's call, Quinton's forces charged with overwhelming momentum. Logan and Lyndon led the charge, unstoppable in their advance. The Filren's forces were caught completely off guard, never anticipating a feigned surrender from Diatoran's troops. Logan and Quinton's former subordinates had already breached their lines by the time they realized what was happening. The mass of over 100,000 soldiers overwhelmed any resistance. Even Filren's 100,000-strong army stood no chance against Logan's assault, given the sheer disparity in numbers. Quinton's men fought with all their might. They were eager to atone for their past through this battle, seeing this as a chance to redeem themselves. They harbored no regrets, even if it meant death. The Filren's forces were outnumbered and outmatched despite their heavy weaponry. They stood little chance in close combat. Now! Caspian seized the moment to give the command. In an instant, artillery fire rained down from within Tenby Passage. The barrage caught the enemy off guard and decimated them. Filron's 100,000 soldiers crumbled under the artillery onslaught. Caspian ordered a ceasefire after a brief but intense bombardment. Further use of heavy artillery risked harming people of their own as Logan and Lyndon were engaged in close combat with the enemy. Chapter 548 Pincer Attack. Everyone, follow me. Let's annihilate the Florinian forces. Wielding his diatanium dagger, Caspian led the charge. The armored battalion, Ferb's subordinates, and 2 other regiments followed Caspian into the fray. Massey kept close to Caspian. She joined the assault with the rest of the troops. The initial artillery onslaught had disheartened the Florinian forces. It significantly diminished their numbers. Caspian led the armored battalion and Quinton's vast contingent. They faced little resistance from the overwhelmed enemy. Balthazar watched from Tenby Passage as the Diatoranian onslaught easily scattered the Florinian troops. The Diatoranian forces were unstoppable and majestic. They carved a bloody path through the enemy ranks. Meanwhile, at the West Eredlin border, the Florinian forces launched a fierce assault. Dax, the West Eredlin's champion, and his troops valiantly resisted. But the absence of 2 regiments limited their defense. Despite facing Filron's elite forces, the West Eredlin's defenders struggled against the overwhelming odds and continuous reinforcements. Champion Dax, we might not withstand Filron's onslaught. Perhaps we should retreat to minimize our losses, a general suggested. Recognizing the problematic situation, hold the line. We must defend this position at all costs. Diatoran will be in trouble if we falter, Dax declared, but the enemy's attack is too intense, and they're well armed. Continuing might lead to our total annihilation, the general warned. Even if we retreat, there's no guarantee we can hold back their advance. We must stand our ground, even if it means fighting to our last breath, Dax insisted. Champion Dax, with the Diatoranian God of War here, we could regroup and proposed. Enough. My decision is final. Retreating now would only invite further pursuit and greater losses. Speak of retreat again, and I'll have you executed for demoralizing our troops, Dax exclaimed in anger. The general dared not push further after seeing Dax's resolve. Outside the Tenby Passage, after hours of fierce combat, Caspian and his forces had nearly wiped out the Florinian invaders. The battlefield was a gruesome sight. There were rivers of blood and mountains of corpses. Most of the Florinian troops were slain. There were only a few hundred managing to flee. The Diatoranian soldiers suffered minimal casualties and secured a decisive victory. Balthazar observed from the walls of the passage. He felt a deep sense of pride watching Quinton's former subordinates fight valiantly. Though wounded in the battle, Logan showed no signs of retreat. Urgent message for the Diatoranian God of War from the West Eredlin's border, an intelligence officer called out. Caspian sensed trouble and took the satellite phone. This is Caspian. What's the situation? He inquired. Diatoranian God of War. Is the king safe? Dax's voice came through. Champion, the king is safe, and Quinton has been dealt with, Caspian assured. Excellent. As long as the king is safe, I'm relieved. I knew there was nothing you couldn't handle. Dax expressed his relief. He knew the king's capture in the West Eredlins could have had dire consequences. Champion Dax, what's the situation at the border? Caspian asked, concerned. Diatoranian God of War, the Florinian forces are relentless, and their heavy weaponry is overwhelming. We're on the brink of collapse, Dax reported. Hold your ground at all costs, Caspian commanded. God of War, the West Eredlin's troops might be wiped out if we soldier on. Do you have a plan? Dax sought guidance. I'll send the armored battalion and your 2 regiments for reinforcement. We can crush the enemy with Quinton's former subordinates attacking from behind. Caspian strategized. How long until your arrival? Dax inquired. From the Tenby Passage, it'll take about 4 hours to flank the Florinian troops. Stall them as long as you can, Caspian instructed. I'll hold the line and await your arrival, Dax promised. Just endure for 4 hours and draw their fire. With our forces attacking from both sides, victory is assured, Caspian planned. I'll find a way to hold on, Dax vowed, ready for the challenge. After ending the call, Balthazar approached Caspian. Diatoranian God of War. Who was that? And what's the situation? Your Majesty, it was Dax. The West Eredlin's front is under severe attack from Filron, Caspian reported truthfully. Do you have a plan to repel the enemy? Balthazar inquired. Your Majesty, I intend to send the armored battalion and Quinton's former troops for support. We'll surround and defeat Filron's forces, Caspian explained his strategy. Brilliant plan. I'll join you in this endeavor, Balthazar declared as he was eager to participate. Your Majesty, that's not advisable. You must oversee the broader strategy and cannot risk being with us. Our battle will be risky, Caspian advised against it. But my presence could boost morale, Balthazar argued. He was keen on leading the battle personally. Your Majesty, there are other places which need you more. With the West Eredlands front line depleted, you should return to the West Eredlands war zone. If you join us, West Eredlands will be left vulnerable, Caspian reasoned. Balthazar considered Caspian's logic and agreed, all right, I'll return to the West Eredlands war zone. Time is critical. I must depart immediately to confront Filran's forces. Caspian stressed the urgency. Diatoranian God of War, I wish to join you on the West Eredlands front. Logan stepped forward, eager to fight. That's not possible. You're too injured. Stay and guard Tenby Passage and focus on healing. Caspian declined, concerned for Logan's well-being. Despite the unresolved matter of their relationship, Caspian didn't want Logan to continue fighting. Caspian was concerned for his well-being as Logan was heavily injured. It's nothing serious. I'm ready for the next battle, Logan insisted, undeterred. Chapter 549, The Grim Situation in the South Eredlands. You must follow orders. Tenby Passage is crucial. Diatoran will be in peril if it falls. You must hold your position, Caspian firmly refused. Yes. Logan dared not object further. Despite his certainty about being Caspian's biological father, Caspian was the Diatoranian God of War. Logan had no choice but to obey. Balthazar's safety was paramount. This allowed the 5 war gods to fight without restraint. While addressing Quinton's former troops, Balthazar proclaimed, Warriors, I witnessed your valiant efforts. I believe in your loyalty. From this moment, you are no longer rebels but the proud soldiers of Diatoran. Defend our land and follow the Diatoranian God of War to repel the enemy. Quinton's former troops were overwhelmed with emotions as they were moved by Balthazar's words. They rallied together. Thank you, Your Majesty. We will defeat the enemy. With no time to waste, Caspian urged, let's move out and destroy the enemy at the West Eredlands front. Following Caspian's command, the vast and energized army marched toward West Eredlands. Balthazar, Lyndon, Logan, and Ferb watched as Caspian led the troops away, each with their thoughts. This battle is crucial for Diatoran's fate. We must emerge victorious, Lyndon stated. Indeed, the chance for Diatoran to counterattack depends on this battle, Ferb added. Caspian has never faced defeat. His presence guarantees victory, Balthazar confidently said. Logan felt such intense emotion as he watched Caspian lead the troops to the West Eredlands. He regretted abandoning Caspian and his mother. It was too late for him to realize that Caspian would have been the pride of the Massey family. Now, Logan wasn't even sure if Caspian would acknowledge their relationship. Logan, your contributions in this battle are commendable. You will be duly rewarded, Balthazar assured. Your Majesty, defending Tenby Passage is my duty. The successful resistance against Quinton was a collective effort. I cannot claim sole credit, Logan humbly replied. Rest assured, every deserving individual will be rewarded. As the commander of Tenby Passage, who is now wounded, your contributions are unparalleled, Balthazar promised. Thank you, Your Majesty, Logan responded as he was deeply moved. Rise? Balthazar gestured for Logan to stand. Your Majesty, Quinton's betrayal has caused much turmoil. It's best if you rest here at the passage, Logan suggested. No, I must return to the West Eredlands war zone immediately, Balthazar declined. He understood the urgency of reinforcing the front line. The soldiers are fighting bravely, so I cannot rest. I will head to West Eredlands now to lead, Balthazar stated as he was determined to contribute. Your Majesty, please take care, Logan said. Commander Massey, Tenby Passage is the gateway to West Eredlands. You must hold it at all costs. I will send reinforcements to assist you, Balthazar assured. With its garrison significantly depleted and Logan injured, additional forces were needed to secure this strategic location. Thank you, Your Majesty. But where can we find reinforcements now? Logan inquired, aware of the current troop deployments. Quinton had over 200,000 troops. With Quinton now gone, his subordinates across West Eredlands will likely heed our call, Balthazar explained. The lack of manpower was critical. It seemed a viable solution to offer Quinton's troops a chance to redeem themselves. I understand. Quinton's men will surely turn to our side, Logan said. encouraged by the prospect. Now is indeed the time for reinforcements. Spread the word of Quinton's demise and see how his other subordinates respond, Balthazar ordered. Yes, Your Majesty, Logan acknowledged. He was ready to implement Balthazar's directive. News of Quinton's death and Balthazar's safety spread quickly. This reassured the other war gods and prompted Quinton's remaining forces in West Eredlands to surrender. Balthazar chose not to punish these men harshly as he recognized the need for soldiers. He ordered them to continue guarding the pass and sent 50,000 troops to support Tenby Passage. Balthazar then returned to the West Eredlands front. Filren launched a full-scale assault at the West Eredlands border. Dax led the West Eredlands troops in a desperate defense. They were suffering heavy losses. Soldiers, the Diatoranian God of War is on his way to support us. Hold the line at all costs. We can surely fight back once he's here. Dax personally led the charge. He boosted morale without revealing Caspian's strategic plan to ensure secrecy until the latter's arrival. The battle plan was top secret. It was planned to be revealed only upon Caspian's arrival. The soldiers at the West Eredlands front were instantly invigorated upon hearing that Caspian, the legendary Diatoranian God of War, was coming to their aid. Caspian was unparalleled. His very name inspired confidence among the troops. Caspian was not just a commander to them, but a legend, whose mere presence guaranteed victory against the enemy. The combined forces of Astronia and Vedesia launched a new attack. Benjamin, the champion of North Eredlands, now commanded the South Eredlands front line. He faced the overwhelming Astronian and Vedesian troops. Their naval firepower was formidable. It posed a significant challenge to the South Eredlands defenses. The South Eredlands' current weaponry and fortifications were no longer sufficient to hold back the enemy. Vedesia and the Astronia were relentless. They gave Diatora no chance to recover. They aimed to conquer South Eredlands in one fell swoop. The South Eredlands naval forces were forced to retreat when the enemy advanced, further jeopardizing the region's security. Chapter 550. Prepare for evacuation. Champion Benjamin, the enemy ships are too powerful. We might not be able to hold on, a worried officer reported. We must protect South Eredlands at all costs. The Diatoranian God of War had entrusted me with the command of the South Eredlands defense. If we lose here, all of Diatoran will be at stake, Benjamin stated. Champion Benjamin, it seems the enemy came prepared this time. Their weapons are causing significant damage, and our current equipment can't inflict any damage on them. Continuing to fight like this might lead to the destruction of our soldiers in South Eredlands. The officer expressed his concerns. We must hold this position at any cost. We cannot let the Diatoranian God of War down. We'll have no honor left if South Eredlands falls, Benjamin declared. Benjamin was aware of the dire situation in South Eredlands. The current circumstances were beyond his control, and continuing this way could lead to the loss of South Eredlands. It was time to consult Caspian on the next steps. Contact the Diatoranian God of War immediately. I need to report our situation to him, Benjamin ordered. Yes. An officer quickly called Caspian using a satellite phone. As the phone rang, Benjamin waited anxiously. At this moment, Caspian was leading a large force toward West Eredlands when he unexpectedly received Benjamin's call. Hello, Champion Benjamin, what's the situation? Caspian inquired. Diatoranian God of War. After you left, Astronia and Vedesia launched a fierce attack. We might not be able to hold on if this continues, Benjamin reported. What's going on? Can't you handle the situation in South Eredlands without me? Caspian asked. He sounded slightly displeased. He had left the south less than a day ago, and the situation had already drastically changed. Benjamin felt somewhat ashamed and said, Diatoranian God of War, you are the leader of the 5 war gods. Your strategic insight far surpasses ours. Benjamin hoped Caspian could return soon to relieve the situation. Caspian was somewhat speechless. He had traveled far to rescue Balthazar, and was preparing to assist West Eredlands, which was in critical danger. Now, South Eredlands was in a pickle too. Caspian wished he could be in multiple places at once. Filren is about to breach the West Eredlands defenses. The situation there is more urgent. I must repel the enemy there before I can return to command in South Eredlands, Caspian explained. He was stretched thin and had to prioritize one front over the other. How long will you need on your end? We're barely holding on here, Benjamin asked. The situation changes from time to time. Filren has deployed its elite forces. If things go well, the battle might end in a few hours, but it could also take days. Caspian said. You achieve swift victories, wherever you would indeed be a testament to your role defeating Filrin in just a few days as Diatoran's savior, Benjamin praised. Enough with the flattery. Tell me honestly, how long can you hold out? Caspian asked sternly. With Astronia and Videsia's elite forces attacking, and their ship's powerful weaponry, and our countermeasures mostly intercepted, I estimate we can only hold for 4 days. Benjamin didn't dare exaggerate. Then, start evacuating the residents of South Lake City to safer areas, Caspian instructed calmly. Are you giving up on South Lake City? Benjamin asked, puzzled. If you can only hold for 4 days and I can't provide support in time, a direct clash would mean death for the residents. It's better to evacuate now, Caspian reasoned. Astronia and Videsia will push forward aggressively if South Lake City falls, putting Diatoran in jeopardy, Benjamin argued urgently. What other choice do we have? You can't win against them, and you can't hold them off. We have to retreat for now and regroup once I return to turn the tide. He had no other solution at the moment. I understand. Benjamin sighed in relief. Thankfully, Caspian hadn't ordered him to hold South Eredlands at all costs. That would have been disastrous. Of course, it would be best to withstand the attack. But if you truly can't hold them back, you must ensure the safety of the people in South Lake City. We cannot allow them to fall victim to the enemy forces, Caspian commanded, offering the best solution he could think of. Yes, Benjamin responded without delay. After hanging up, Caspian resumed his journey toward the West Eredlands border, ready to lead a massive force in a surprise attack from behind enemy lines. Following the call, Benjamin issued an official announcement instructing the residents of South Lake City to evacuate. The news immediately sparked panic among the populace. It led everyone to believe that the city was on the brink of falling. Residents hurriedly packed their essentials and prepared to flee for their lives. The people thought he was directing the battle as they were unaware of the broader war situation. They still believed he was in command in South Eredlands. The military's announcement of evacuation led many to speculate that Caspian was planning to retreat from the south, adding to the resentment toward him. The armored battalion guards protecting Willow also received the news. They advised Willow to prepare for departure from South Lake City. Mrs. Lynch, please pack your belongings. We need to escort you out of South Lake City, Captain Finn Doherty of the armored battalion told Willow. Why should we leave South Lake City? Willow asked, puzzled. We're simply following orders from higher up, Finn replied. Could it be that South Lake City is about to be invaded? Zoe inquired. That shouldn't be the case. Aren't the enemy forces at sea? And with so many soldiers in South Lake City, how could it fall so quickly? Willow reasoned. The enemy's bombardment seems fierce. It's safer to leave for now, Zoe suggested. Willow nodded as she considered Zoe's point to be valid. Finn, tell me the truth. What's the current situation? Willow pressed for answers. Mrs. Lynch, my duty is to ensure your safety. I'm not privy to other details, Finn responded. He figured out the intent behind the orders, but was cautious not to speak out of turn. Call Caspian for me. I need to know what's happening, Willow requested. She was unaware of Caspian's satellite phone number. Mrs. Lynch, the God of War has already left South Eredlands. We don't have a way to contact him, Finn said. What? Caspian left South Eredlands. Where did he go? Willow was even more confused. Could it be that Caspian, the chief commander himself, fled the scene after seeing the dire situation? Zoe exclaimed in surprise.